Trust the process. How does that make you feel? How can I help you? What does that mean to you? How's that working for you? Don't sweat the small stuff. Nothing good comes easy. Feel the feeling. Things a therapist might say. Yes! This is the Thera Podcast. Two politically incorrect counseling professors and therapists who have many years of experience and wisdom and insight that they want to share. If you're a therapist, educator, counselor in training, or anyone interested in therapy, this is your epicenter for everything you should know. There are so many people in the world going through extreme mental and emotional issues, and we want to spotlight all the things we believe that work and the things that don't. They are wise sages, caring, intelligent, and are leaders in mental health counseling. The Thera Podcast. And here they are, Drs. Martin Wesley and David Whittinghill.
Well, welcome to another edition of the Thera Podcast. This is Dr. Martin Wesley, and of course our host, the honorable, the old David Whittinghill. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing fine, Marty. Good to be here. Glad we have a distinguished guest and somebody to talk to today. I'll turn up my hearing aid so I can hear.
Because of that old introduction? Is that what that's about?
Yes, the old introduction. And get my walker over here to the table.
Okay.
I'm an old man.
Well, no, I really feel good about having Dr. Andrea Brooks with us today. She talked about feeling old, though. She isn't not only a former faculty member that I worked with, but she is also a former student. So it's been a while, and I really look forward to talking with her. Hey, Andrea, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would like to just sit back and reminisce on a few things, but at the same time, we're, primarily asking you to talk to us about your expertise specific to the Counseling Compact. So not only are you the counselor educator, you have been in the counseling field for some time. You have been a board member for, I think, 7 years, as well as the board chair for more than once. And but you are also, I think, is it the vice chair of the Counseling Compact?
Yes, and also as of last week, the chair of the Rules Committee.
Okay, great.
I'm wearing a lot of hats right now.
Well, you know me and hats, so
you do enjoy a good hat.
I've got plenty myself, but yeah, it sounds like I'll send you one of these days. Who knows?
Thanks, I'll take it. I'll add to
a
the
little
collection.
Sweat with it, maybe.
Well, you can keep that part.
Okay. Well, no, I am looking forward to learning more about the Counseling Compact, and so we'll be throwing some questions at you. But why don't you, if you don't mind, just talk a little bit about, what kind of problem were we trying to fix to even develop this Counseling Compact, and what is it about?
Sure. Well, first, as a member of the state board in Kentucky and a member of the executive committee of the Counseling Compact, I always have to start out any of these discussions with the obligatory legal disclaimer, which is simple, but just, I am a member of these entities and have had experiences there, know a lot about the laws related to both. But, what I'm speaking to you today about is more about my personal experiences and what I've learned, and not actual positions of the boards in the compact. So we all know that, but I always have to go through that spiel before talking. But back to the important thing. The Counseling Compact is basically a legal agreement between member states that says if you are an independently licensed professional counselor in your home state where you reside, then you can possibly qualify to have a privilege to practice counseling in other member states. And of course, there's, little qualifiers here and there, but that's basically the premise. And the problem that is being solved is there is a greater counseling need, especially in underserved areas, than we have counselors. And since we now have a high reliance and use of virtual means like we're doing here with this podcast, we have the ability to allow counselors to cross state lines to practice. So our counseling compact counts both virtually and face-to-face shared air experiences, unlike the psychology compact, which is just virtual, right? Ours is both. So that helps with people that live in those kind of tri-state, quad-state corners, where they might live in one state but actually have more practicing opportunities in the state across the river, or just across those state lines. So it helps with that. Also, Marty, as you know, being a former licensure board member in Kentucky, some states have just really nasty endorsement rules. And, when I first started practicing in Kentucky, it would just keep me up at night when we would have an applicant that had been licensed as a professional counselor in one state for 25 years and would apply through endorsement to Kentucky, but they didn't have a currently qualifying degree. Maybe it wasn't CACREP accredited, or maybe it was one of the original guidance counseling preparation degrees, and it didn't have a diagnosis class or something along those lines. And we would have to deny that application, even though they had been practicing for over 20 years in their home state. That just seemed wrong. And so I think the compact, one of the goals, the main goal, of course, is to get more counselors to clients. But another problem it fixes is it clears up some of those endorsement issues that were preventing counselors, qualified counselors, good counselors, from practicing in other states.
So just to be clear, if I'm on the edge of, say, Florida, and I have privilege to practice in Georgia, is one of those compact states, people from Georgia could drive to my office and we could have a face-to-face meeting.
If you have a privilege to practice in Florida and Georgia, I don't see anything that would prevent that.
Okay, I think that would be something that would be very, very, very beneficial to all our counselors.
What's funny is when I again, we've been wanting this for some time, and again, we'll go through the specifics. But when I remember going to an AASCB meeting many years ago with Dr. Larry Sexton, which unfortunately he passed away just a little over a year ago, which is quite sad. But he was one of my mentors. But he had been there literally at an AASCB.
It's a mouthful.
I know it's a mouthful. Meeting like 30 years before. And he literally told me the theme is the same as it was way back then. Yes. And the theme at that time was reciprocity and portability. And we are finally, years and years later, finally getting there.
Yes. When I've been to the CRBS, the NBCC's Counseling Regulatory Board Summit for the past 7 years. And every year when you're doing your application, or your registration, your registration to attend, they ask, the very last question is, what are your top 3 issues that your board is dealing with? And for the past 7 years, the top has always been endorsement, reciprocity. So, it's just been a common theme forever. All states struggle. We just have so many different rules and criteria and qualifications needed to become counselors in our state, and there's just not enough uniformity. So we have a lot of good counselors who move into a state that don't get to practice immediately because that state has a different set of rules to what it takes to be a professional counselor. Yeah, and this helps to fix that.
And I think some people would see this as a very negative thing and a very positive thing at the same time. I think again, because there's a lot of states that have sort of, in some ways, developed the standards to match up with their own philosophical views, that they need to know more about, psychopharmacology, or they need to know more about substance abuse or something like that. But in many ways, this is getting a back door to be able to practice in certain states. So I'm sort of curious about that. For example, Kentucky was one of the very first states to go CACREP only. And yet now, that has somewhat been compromised because we are allowing states to practice in Kentucky without a CACREP degree.
Sure. So, I think I would first respond to that by by pointing out that the whole purpose of a state board is to develop rules, guidelines, processes that protect the public. And so basically, when you think about it that way, it's the state is responsible for developing rules and guidelines that create the bare minimum that a counselor must possess in order to practice safely with clients. It's not supposed to define best practice. And so I think it's really easy for a state to kind of lose sight of that as they're, wanting safe counselors, good counselors, quality counselors, but also realizing that the task is really to define what the minimum is in order for counselors to not protect the public. And I think all states want their counselors to be the best counselors, the highest quality counselors possible, but that's not really our task. That's more, I would think, the state counseling organization. Their task would be to help counselors be the best quality that they can be. But the licensure board is just to make sure that people don't get harmed. And you can do that through a lot of ways. But I think that's how, in Kentucky, we have one of the highest set of regulations out there. States, the number of hours required to go from provisionally licensed to independent licensed in the country range from 1,500 total hours to 4,500 total hours. Kentucky requires 4,000. So very high on that spectrum. Like Dr. Wesley said, Kentucky was the first state to implement KCREP requirement into practice. They weren't the first state to pass it, but they were the first state to implement it. So that to me says more of a best practice than a bare minimum, possibly. Of course, we could have a full hour to talk about that as well.
Yeah, we could, couldn't we?
But when you, and I guess my main reason for saying that is when you look at all the other states that don't require it right now, it kind of speaks to more of a best practice level. So, and your question really was, how can all states be okay with this if we have such, ranging qualifications from state to state? How can Kentucky specifically that requires KCREP be okay with counselors coming in that are not from KCREP programs or from states that had 1,500 hours of professional practice and we require 4,000?
Yes.
And that's a good question. First, I want to say, it wasn't the board that passed the law to join the compact. It was state legislators, right? It was congressmen, it was senators that passed the law. A state can actually pass the compact without the board ever knowing they did, which is an interesting setup. I think most boards are in the know about what's going on, but it is set up that way. It is a governmental process. But I think, it's just time for uniformity. And I think that our state specifically has trust that the people that were in the TAG group, the group that created the wording of the initial law, and then also, each state appointed commissioner. I think there's just a lot of trust in those people to get it right, to know that they will set up the bare minimum requirements in a way that's not going to lead to harm. Long way to answer that question, but there it is.
No.
Yeah, and I think it answers a lot of my questions, which are, how would the compact handle those things like all the different names for counselors, like licensed mental health counselors versus licensed professional counselors, and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. So, first of all, I'm so impressed by the group of 20 people. They're called the TAG group. And on the spot here, I can't think of what TAG stands for. I'll think of it in a minute, probably just randomly spit it out. But so a group of 20 people from various states, attorneys, former board members, senators, counselors, organization leaders, they all got together and created the initial wording. And they did a really good job of defining the terms that they thought might give people trouble and creating a wonderful definition section to help in those instances, because the whole issue is we don't have uniformity. So it was important to define what each of the terms meant in how the compact perceived it. And so one of the definitions is LPCC, or LPC, I guess. So licensed professional counselor. And that definition says it's no matter what you're called in your state, if you were trained in this way and you're meant to be a licensed counselor, we're just going to generally call everyone LPCs, but it means the LMHCs in Florida. And, all of whether you're an LPCC, LPC, LP, CAC, like as long as you're independently licensed in your state, it counts.
That's a great way to go about it.
Yes.
I'm so glad they did that because there's so much confusion among consumers, let alone people from different states.
Yes, and if they hadn't, then theoretically, some states wouldn't have been eligible to apply until they changed their statutes and called, their license something different. And we couldn't wait for that. We needed this to move forward quickly.
Excellent.
I am hoping actually there may be even a more of a push to bring some of that uniformity. Do you think once they have joined with this and see the positives of it, then maybe there will be some, looking back to what in the ACA 2020 vision was as an example, where we'll try to start using similar type scope of practice as well as maybe titles. So
one of the things that I really like about the compact is there is a set scope of practice. In order for a state to join the compact, their licensed independent professional counselors have to be able to diagnose, assess, and treat mental health disorders. And if your state does not allow all three, diagnostic, abilities, assessment, and treatment, then your state could not participate. So we did have a couple of states that are in the process of working through their law now, but had to go back and change their statutes to allow for assessment or allow for diagnosis in order to participate in the compact. And so cheers for the compact, because that may have never happened in that state had there not been something that they were working toward, a reason for them to change it in order to qualify for this compact and to show that diagnosing, treating, and assessing mental health disorders is it's a national understanding of what counselors can do, which has helped some of those states that, their counselors didn't have those privileges and powers to be able to get those, to see that it was just the national understanding.
Wonderful.
Yeah. No, that is great.
Well,
I hadn't heard that. So
yeah. And so along those lines, what about the ethical guidelines? Will they still be following the same ones? I mean, right now we've got NBCC's guidelines, ACA's guidelines.
Yeah. So the compact language itself does not speak to there's no place in the law that says that the compact commissioners will adopt a certain code. The compact also is built to never take away from the powers of the state. So I think basically how that would be addressed is you have to, if you have a privilege to practice in another state, you have to abide by that state's rules and law. And so if that state has adopted the NBCC Code of Ethics or the ACA Code of Ethics, you're required to follow what that state requires. So that's there's a big onus on the participant, on the counselor to, if you're going to have a privilege to practice in 6 states, you have to know 6 sets of laws, or 7, including your home state. A lot of states are, as a side effect of that, preparing jurisprudence exams that didn't have them before, expecting a huge uptick in counselors from out of state, coming into their state to practice. So, it's requiring states to start thinking about jurisprudence exams. I know Kentucky is, because, age of consent. What do you do with domestic violence? Do you call the police? Do you report it? Do you know the numbers, the phone numbers for Kentucky resources? Just things like that are different from state to state. I don't see those types of things becoming uniform, because a lot of that is within the power of the state and it's not counselor specific. Those are rules that all the mental health professionals in those states share. So I don't see the counseling compact as sparking changes to those for uniformity, but the way to fix that is, the counselor is responsible for knowing all of the ethical codes that state is responsible for following, and all the legal rules too.
Yeah. Let's go back to some of that practicality. Just again, when we first heard about the Counseling Compact, I think a lot of us were not sure where it was going. And so maybe clarify some of that. So, I hear what you're saying in the sense that I'm assuming you have to be licensed independently in one of those states, and then you can apply to specific states, or again, there was that unknown. Are you going to be able to practice in all of the states within the compact? So maybe you can clarify that. So.
Well, and let me say that a lot of the practicality pieces, a lot of the processes have not been fully worked out just yet. I can say where the compact is. We have awarded a contract to Inspiring Apps, which is the company that is building the database. And every 2 weeks, we get an update on the process or the progress of how that database is coming. We're in an agreement with 2 other counseling compacts, the speech audiology folks and occupational therapists. We're working together to create one database for all 3 of us so we can pull more money together and get more bells and whistles. So that's going well. So until that is built out, I don't think that I can say for sure how the process will look, but I can say in general terms, the idea is that you have to become initially licensed in your home state, and home state is defined by, the domiciled language like we have in Kentucky. It will be your driver's license state, your voter's registration, some sort of proof there. You have to be initially licensed. And by initially licensed, I mean, go through the whole, you can't be through endorsement. It can't be through reciprocity. It has to be through, you did all of your supervision hours there, maybe not in that state, but, gone through that type of licensure process. So if your home state is not a compact member state, then you can't be a part of the compact. You can't just go get licensed in another state that is a member state. You have to be your home state has to be a member state, and you have to be initially licensed there. If you move physically to another state, you have to go through the whole initial licensure process for that state and become licensed in that state through that process in order to stay a part of the compact. Okay, so that was going down a rabbit hole a little bit. But if you're licensed, let's use Florida. Florida is a compact state. If you're initially licensed in Florida and you want to become or have a privilege to practice in Georgia and Tennessee and Kentucky, then you would go through the compact's website and apply for a privilege to practice in those states. And as long as Florida says that you are eligible to be a part of the compact, then you would be automatically approved. You pay your fees, of course, you would be approved to have a privilege to practice in those states. There's a fee to each of those states. It's a fee that will be less than the initial licensure fee, of course, so it's cheaper. And you don't have to do a background check for each state. You just became initially licensed in Florida. And as long as Florida says you're eligible to join the compact, then you can immediately, the goal is 48 hours or less, get your privilege to practice in those other states that you want to join that are member states.
So just given my example, I mean, I'm licensed in Kentucky. I'm licensed in Florida. My driver's license, and I live for the most part here in Florida. But, one day I may want to be a snowbird, and because I'm getting older like David here, and have a place maybe at both places. But the issue is I'm assuming you're still saying my home state would always be Florida as long as my driver's license is attached to that license, even if I'm licensed in another state.
Yes, even snowbirds they cause a lot of problems. All right, where do you pay your taxes? Yeah. I get it. My dad is a snowbird as well. But yes, as long as you continue your as long as you count your home state as Florida with your driver's license and voter registration, you can prove that. And as long as you stay licensed in Florida, then you can continue to have your privileges to practice.
But it sounds like in one sense, we're not talking necessarily physically located at. So if for example, I am spending 3 months in Kentucky and my license is in Florida, I can still treat people in Florida. I can still treat people in in Kentucky as well, because I'm licensed there. But if I had a privilege to do work in Indiana, I could still do that, but it still has to be through my license in Florida, because that is where my driver's license is in a sense.
Right. You still also have to follow the state law. So if your state has a rule that says you have to be physically present in that state in order to practice, they probably wouldn't have joined the compact, because
Right.
they would have to, that wouldn't really be within the spirit of the compact. But I do know that some states do require that there's also one state that says if you're licensed in another state and you are traveling through their state while you're virtually conducting a session, you have to be licensed in that state if you're in that state and conducting counseling. So I think that one of the best things that's going to come from this compact is to show that those instances are not the norm, and it's going to encourage those states to kind of jump on the nationally norm ship here and come to the understanding that we're a technological virtual world now, and we need to be able to meet clients where they are, which is on the screen, and it doesn't really matter where you're physically located in that instance. But to answer your question, you still have to follow the law. So if your state has a law that says you have to be physically in that state, or your client must be physically in the state, then you need to follow that law. The counseling compact doesn't supersede that or trump that in any way. But in your specific example, Kentucky and Florida don't have those rules, so you would be okay.
Right. Yeah. No. I think what was really important, I think, is what you were just starting out with, was like these Tri-City states. So, if I'm licensed in Kentucky and live in, Florence, Kentucky, as an example, and I have a lot of my clients that are in Cincinnati, and there's an emergency that happens, and I need to handle that situation through telephonically or online, whatever the case is, it would be ridiculous to literally drive to that state to work in an emergency, or to force that client to actually work with somebody that they've never worked with before. It would be unethical to do that. So I agree with you that this will really open up the individual board's eyes to the potential scenarios that are possible, and not only possible, but are likely.
Right. And it fixes a lot of just ridiculous scenarios where, in that same instance, if you have a client from Cincinnati and a counselor from Florence, Kentucky, and it could be closer, you could be the closest counselor to that client that lives in Cincinnati, closer than any other Ohio counselor. So they come to you, but in that instance, you would be required to pay for two different licenses, two different state licenses, in order to be accessible to that client when you're their closest counselor. So, this still, you're having to have a privilege to practice, but it's a much cheaper option with so many more benefits than just the cheaper option. And it also is going to, my favorite part from the client side is that the compact will allow for a wider pool of counselors to choose from. So you're not just limited to that one or two person pool of counselors in your county. You can choose from a plethora of people from different specialties, just having the best counselor that's a good fit for you, instead of having just that one counselor that's available and not having a good experience, and then never trying counseling again because they thought that was the only way that counseling could be experienced. So that's my favorite part about the compact.
No, I agree. That's very true.
Two politically incorrect counseling professors and therapists with never-ending experience and wisdom who are proud to be politically incorrect. You're listening to the Thera Podcast. Now, back to your hosts, Drs. Martin Wesley and David Whittinghill.
I'm wondering, I see all the good it can do, and however, I'm a little stuck on how, and I want you to speak to the database in a second, but right now I'm thinking about individuals who've been disciplined by their home state, how will the other compact states know about that?
Right. So, kind of just answered the question. It's a shared database. It's should be instant. That each of the states and the client and the counselor are required to report any kind of adverse action, which is any kind of consequence, any under a probation or any kind of action taken against your license. You're required to report that within 30 days to the database. And then that information, it's a shared database. It's available to all of the states. So at that point, each state that you have a privilege to practice in can decide if they want to continue their privilege to practice with you or discontinue it. So any state has that choice. So all the states don't have to make the same decision. Some states can choose to allow you to continue. Some states can choose to not. But the only definite is if the home state decides to have you lose your license, then you automatically lose all of your privileges to practice.
Okay. I'm glad you discussed that because I really wondered about the database and, having worked with all the different states over the years as a member of NBCC, I know how fractured that whole process is.
Absolutely. And that's actually, if you plug into AI and say, what's the pros of the counseling compact? One of the pros it will give you is an increased amount of kind of shared governance with adverse actions, because there's many times when I've been in a situation where a person from Kentucky has lost their ability to practice and then they automatically go to another state, but they will do that more quickly than we can update our system to go through all the legal processes of the agreed orders and getting it through all the proper channels to where it can be posted. And then they'll get their license in the other state because it doesn't look like there's been an adverse action in Kentucky. This will be up to 30 days, but it will be immediate. Once it's shared with the database, it will be automatically visible to the other states and they can have the information they need to make their decisions. I'll also say, let's say that my home state is Kentucky and I have a privilege to practice in Ohio, and I get a complaint from a client in Ohio. Ohio will conduct that investigation, and then we'll share the results with Kentucky and the other states that I have a privilege to practice in. So it's not just the home state that investigates complaints for that client. It's, and I like that because wherever the complaint, wherever the action happened that the complaint was made about, whatever state that was in, it would be very difficult for the Kentucky board to investigate complaints in other states, not knowing, the agencies there and all of that. So I like that the investigations happen within the state board where the complaint occurred. And then that's shared to everybody else.
That's excellent.
That is good. I mean, at the same time, I'm also seeing some issues related to that, considering some states may investigate something within 2 months and another state may take 3 years.
That's true.
and me and you have seen that happen
That's
before,
true.
where certain investigations take forever.
Yes.
Because of due process, because of attorneys involved, because of negotiations, because of the lack of inability to contact people, or, the contract negotiations going on with an investigator through the state office. I mean, there's just so many different scenarios that could happen.
And so many scenarios that the board can't control. So for a lot of states, the board does not do these actions on their own. They contract with a state agency to be their administrators. And so the board makes votes based on the information presented to them, and they always can't control what information is presented to them. So it's really difficult to have the information that you need to make the decisions in a timely manner. But, when there's a problem, everybody says the board, right? The big bad board. But a lot of times we're really stuck with the information that we have to work with. So.
One question I have too relates to other activities, duties, responsibilities that the board controls outside of the counseling process. And I'm thinking specifically of supervision. How does this, the duties of someone working in a different state through this compact, how does this affect supervision in any way? Can they supervise another person in a different state in which they hold a practice, as an example?
So the counseling compact only involves licensure at the independent practicing level. It does not have anything to do with a supervision credential. So that's important to say first. I think that when you get a privilege to practice, if you are a supervisor in your state, that credential does not automatically come over with you. So I guess the best answer to your question would be it's really up to the state. You would have to practice as a supervisor in that state based on their rules. So as long as the individual state would allow supervision from someone physically out of the state, but with a privilege to practice in that state, then it would be okay. I will say that I did make a comment when KCREP was working on the 2024 standards and, sent out the first draft for revision. I did send in a comment because the definition is very clear about who can be a supervisor for practicum and internship. And it was very clear about license. And so I asked, what are your thoughts about adding privilege to practice, a license or privilege to practice. So someone could, because I can foresee a situation, especially in small towns, thinking about the comp cares in the small towns around me, how much of their counseling practice will be not really outsourced, but will be completed by people who are outside of the state working with a privilege to practice virtually, Zooming in or not Zoom, whatever platform they're using, conducting sessions virtually from another state. And so that person might also be the clinical director there, living in Florida. We'll just use Florida and Kentucky just to keep it consistent, but living in Florida, but practicing at a comp care in Kentucky, and also serving as the clinical director and supervising everyone in the building. So thinking about, KCREP accredited programs, practicum and internship, having to have an on-site supervisor, will they be okay with that? Having that student being supervised, their on-site supervisor in Kentucky, being a Florida supervisor with a privilege to practice in Kentucky. Right. And so, when I asked that, it was we'll have to think about that moment. But I don't think the intention is for them to add privilege to practice to the language. But if you look at the definitions of the compact, a privilege to practice, it says in the definition, is equivalent to a license. So I would expect that it would be allowed in most instances, or at least a good argument could be made for it. I don't think anyone's come out and actually said this is what it will look like. But logically, it makes sense that supervision would be allowed through a privilege to practice.
Right. And you're talking primarily related to academic supervision.
Well, I'd use that as the primary example, just, as with just the information that I know about from what I've had experience actually having conversations. But I think, kind of parallel processing it out to looking at provisional supervision as well. And that, in Kentucky, the LPCA to LPCC, that supervision time, I think it would be the same.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think you would have to apply in that state to get that supervision credential if it's a state that has one, and as long as the state's okay with it, then it would work. I don't foresee Kentucky saying that we wouldn't allow someone with a privilege to practice to apply for a supervision credential.
Interesting.
One other kind of off topic maybe point I've been thinking about is whether the counseling compact will have some kind of platform similar to Psychology Today or Better Health, something like that, where all the counselors will be on the site, or you'll be able to look them up.
So like a directory, like a forward facing directory. Yeah. So I don't know if that's actually been discussed about how that will look. But yeah, I believe that there would have to be a directory of some kind. I think all states have it. You can look someone up by license number and see if there's any disciplinary action. I mean, I guess I can't say for sure that that's in the works, but I would think it would have to be.
That makes sense to me that it would, it wouldn't, if nothing else, for verification, situations, but also maybe using it as a referral type network in a sense. And I think that would help. Maybe you can even get some extra support money-wise by having little badges or something that might go with it. I don't know.
True. Like this is, like top fan, right? On Facebook sites. Yeah. And this is someone who has been, has privilege to practice in this many states or,
Exactly. Yeah. And being able to upload your picture that would go with that or and links that could link them to other things potentially. Yeah. It makes sense to me anyways.
I will say that that's probably a down the road, activity. It has been a process trying to get the database up and running, because you want to get it right. And I think all of us have been stunned by the amount of work and thinking and problem solving and computer coding is no one's no licensure board members primary education area. So it's
not one of my skill sets.
It's not one of my strong suits, no. But having to think about each part of the database at such a basic level, what the variables are that need to be included, it makes me dizzy sometimes with all the thinking that has had to go into that.
Well, I would say that, and just comparing the NBCC's database as an example, I don't like theirs. And I'll throw that out. I think that one is very poorly done for NCCs and things like that. So anyway, but just a thought, if that would be more, again, I don't know. I guess it depends on your philosophy. If it is just protecting the public, that's one thing. But if it's also allowing some promotion, to me, I see that Counseling Compact sort of in the middle, if that makes sense, as opposed to a board member, the board's responsibility. This is sort of crosses both areas where they're protecting the public, but they're also, and working for the state boards, but they're also advocating for the profession. Otherwise, we'd be doing other therapists, social workers and other things, maybe helping them out. This is specific for counseling. So I think there is sort of a cross there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the compact has public meetings. Every meeting is public, open meeting. There's always time for public comment period at the end. And I love the public comment period because you get so many good ideas. This is a great idea that can be shared. I like that. We have a lot of knowledgeable people on the compact that automatically know the pros and cons of things like that. Yeah. There's probably something I'm not even thinking about that would prohibit it or, in some way, but I think it's a great idea. Kentucky, I mentioned the supervision credential before. A lot of counselors were having trouble finding folks that were qualified that had the S credential. So we created, just a little spreadsheet on the website that said, here's the supervisor list and, here's the zip code that they live in. We don't give their addresses or whatever. But that was a great way to, promote those that want to do supervision, but just to show who's eligible. So maybe some extra information in the directory with the compact wouldn't be such a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm learning a lot. Well, one thing is this comes down to the nitty gritty. How much is this going to cost the counselor if they want to work in a couple different states, or does it vary based on states?
Yeah, it will vary based on state. So each state can choose their own cost, their own fee. There will be a set fee, compact fee to get your, application through the compact to be a part of the database. And then each state that you want to get a privilege to practice in, each state will have their own fee. It's intended that the fee will be less than the initial licensure fee. So that's helpful because, it's not meant to be a barrier. It's not meant to be a moneymaker for anyone. But states will set their fee. They'll take into account what other occupations within their state that are part of compacts, what they do. They'll also take a look at how many people have initial licensure in their state that live out of state, so that those, you won't have that income anymore. That will change to the privilege, most likely. A lot of people, I think, will drop their initial licensure in each of those states and move to the privilege, since there really is no difference in how you can practice. So they'll set their fee based on that.
Well, except for supervision in some ways. Like I said, if I wanted to supervise people like in Kentucky and I don't live there, I can still do that in some ways. And if I went to the privilege only, then I may lose some benefits potentially.
I think it would depend on how that state rules there.
Right, exactly.
I think a lot of states will continue to allow those with the privilege to practice to supervise. But you would want to check on that, right? You would want to check on those to see what really would be the pros and cons to changing that initial license to a privilege to practice in that state that's not your home state. Absolutely. And that might be something that's a good idea to encourage states to do, is to create a little statement, a little FAQ about, should I let this initial licensure go and move to a privilege to practice? The main pros to not doing an initial license in your non-home state and going to a privilege to practice is just, if are you guys both licensed in multiple states? Marty, you are. Okay. Well, if you're licensed in multiple states, one of the tough things about that is having to keep up with the renewal dates and the renewal requirements for each of the states. How many CEUs do you need? What areas do they have to be in? Are they certain? I know, Marty, you give a lot of the state required trainings and all of that. So the good thing about the compact is you only have to complete your CEUs, satisfy your home state CEU requirements. So whether, Kentucky gets 10, some states are 20. Doesn't matter what the other states require. You only have to satisfy your home state CEU requirements. And you only have to pay your renewal fees at the time that your home state's renewal is required. So to me, that's helpful. I've seen some folks who are working with, the platforms like BetterHelp and such that are licensed in 5, 6, 10 states, and the Excel spreadsheets that they have kind of keeping track of this day, this is due, this day, this is due. It's mind blowing. It's a huge headache. So I love that part about the compact. And I think a lot of people will choose to move to a privilege to practice just to get rid of that Excel spreadsheet and to keep it all kind of, isolated into what's required for their home state. But yes, there will be cons too, and they'll all be state specific. I wouldn't even be able to guess what they would be. But one would definitely be that you would need to check to make sure that you can have a privilege to practice and supervise if that's something that's important to you.
No, makes sense. Does make sense.
I just want to say, Andrea, I really appreciate all the work you put into this. I have no idea. I have some idea, but I can tell that it's been a lot.
It is. It's it's a totally voluntary position, right? There's no compensation for being a commissioner to the compact. You don't even get your state daily per diem rate for the work that you do. And it's with the committees that I'm on, it's probably a 3-day out of the month commitment. Not the full day, but there's things on 3 days. And then you're working other times in conversations about things. And of course, staying within Open Meetings Act, not deep conversations, more administrative conversations, I guess you can say. But each commissioner is also on a committee. So everyone's doing committee work, not just me. But it's very rewarding work. And it's work that I enjoy. So it doesn't feel like work, really. It's nice. And it's very much an honor to be a part of it. I will say from being on the inside there, the folks that are affiliated with it, the attorney for the compact is amazingly brilliant. And, everyone that's been involved with getting it off the ground, our chair, Jamie Doming from Louisiana, amazingly brilliant. She's a executive director for their board that has an MBA and, just has worked to create their website and their database in Louisiana. So has all this amazing information and insight about what's needed. The compact really is in good hands. And I'm very proud of the work that's been done on it.
Well, I would say that you're one of those brilliant people too. In fact, I'll throw out.
You'd be one of few that would say that.
Me and you, though, we were one of the very first, if not the first, people that actually discussed this in a conference workshop that we put up, and talking about the need to move away from these individual reciprocity and endorsement agreements and actually move toward an interstate compact. So
yes.
a little kudos.
Myrtle Beach. Yeah.
We did that.
Yeah. I remember it well. And that's, I've told you Kentucky's problem with endorsement. That's literally kept me up at nights in the beginning. Kentucky was the first state, along with Tennessee, to get a reciprocity agreement and start that train going. Ohio came, and now Kentucky's in a reciprocity agreement with North Carolina. The universal licensure has kind of slowed that train down a little bit. States joining in the universal licensure legislation. So that's changed. But, reciprocity agreements are great. That really helped with those three states with the endorsement debacle in Kentucky. But even then, reciprocity doesn't always mean what's accepted here is accepted there. In Tennessee, it was full licensure for 5 years. In North Carolina, it's 2 years. In Ohio, it's 2 years. It's not exactly what reciprocity was meant to be. The Counseling Compact is as close to true reciprocity as we've seen yet in attempts to do this. So it really is nice to know that if you have a license in your home state, an independent license in your home state, and you qualify for the compact, you get your privilege to practice in 1 to 2 business days is what we're hoping for. And that's really nice. So people know what to expect and they actually get what they expect.
Yeah.
Is there any rollout date that?
Well, that date keeps getting pushed back. So I hate to even say, it's almost like a curse of talking about a no-hitter. I don't want to say it and then we have to push it back a little bit. Right. What is being projected now is end of 2024, beginning of 2025. I think that we started working on the database a little bit quicker than what we expected. I think that the 2-week updates about the progress of the compact, I think they're going well. Everybody's speaking favorably of that. I would think that what I think the compact needs to be working now is getting states ready to onboard. And so I think I would think around December of 2024 or January of 2025, as long as the process for onboarding states goes relatively smoothly. And when I say that, this database has to talk two directionally, right? States have to be able to upload information to the database, and the database has to be able to speak back to the state's databases for things like who has a privilege to practice in what states and for adverse actions and those things. So getting states' systems compatible to be able to conversate with the database is going to be important. And when you're thinking about state government IT systems and the security stuff, all of those things that I definitely do not have a degree in to even be talking about, but have learned a little from my meetings here. I think that I could see how some glitches will happen. So I want to say cautiously December of this year, January of next year, but just knowing that could be pushed back a little depending upon how quickly states can onboard.
So you guys heard it here. Dr. Andrea Brooks has just promised it will be up by.
Oh, gosh, no, don't do that to me. I think I was very clear in saying that I have no clue, to be honest.
We all hear what we want to hear, I guess.
And I've learned that as well, yeah.
Yeah.
And might be guilty of it, too.
Well, Dr. Andrea Brooks, I sure appreciate that. I've learned a lot about the experience, and I'm sure, and maybe we'll have you. Hopefully, we won't have you before, in next spring or something like that. And you're saying, well, we're looking at the, this still coming up in the next year or so, but hopefully it's going to come up soon. So.
I really hope that's not the case too. And I can just see that conversation with you adding in clips of this talk here exactly. Where I said, hey, it's going to be December. I sure hope that it's up and ready. I know that a lot of time and effort and energy has been put in by a lot of people to get to where we are now. And looking back to 2022 in October, when we all gathered in Washington, a commissioner from each state gathered in Washington to elect the executive committee members and to get this started. I think we all expected it to go more quickly, but that was because we just didn't have the right expectations. We didn't understand all the pieces and parts that had to come together for it. So it's a little more slowly than what anyone anticipated, but it's really because we anticipated incorrectly. So we're doing it right. We're doing it the way that it should be. So this will work. And so it's going to happen. It's just taking a little bit of time.
Well, yeah, it'll happen right. So.
Yeah, and for people that want to follow it, they just follow the information on the website.
Yeah, counselingcompact.org is the website. It is updated. I mean, I think the oldest that the information ever is a week old. You can see what states are in the compact, what states have proposed legislation to join the compact, and even the numbers related to the House bills and the Senate bills. All of the regulations, the rules, states have regulations, nation has rules. All of the rules that are proposed that are being discussed in the Rules Committee meetings and then on to Executive Committee and then on to the full commission, those are very clearly outlined on the website. The dates and the times and the agendas and the links to meetings, they're all there. The meetings are public. They're open to the public. Can't speak during the meetings, but at the end, the chair opens it up to public comment and questions. And anybody at all can take themselves off mute and ask their question or type their question in chat. And all of the questions are addressed that we can fit in for time, of course. Very, very cognizant to end the meetings at the time that they're supposed to end. But other than that, any question, there's an FAQ, any question that you have, you can ask there. There's also an email address. I think it's info@counselingcompact.org. You might want to check that to make sure. But that goes straight to the executive director, and he answers those questions really quickly and is very knowledgeable. No questions too small. That's his job, to answer questions. So all of the information that you need, any question you need answered, can be answered through that website.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dr. Brooks. And I look forward to talking again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Thanks, Andrea.
You've been listening to the Thera Podcast. If you're a therapist, educator, a counselor in training, or anyone interested in therapy, this is your epicenter for everything you should know. Dr. Martin Wesley and Dr. David Whittinghill are counseling professors and therapists who have endless knowledge and wisdom. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can find our website at www.therapodcast.com. Find the show on all the major podcast platforms. And to email Dr. Wesley, send it to wesleyphd@gmail.com. Take care and see you next time on the Thera Podcast.
Are you for real?